Hello, all. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome. My name is Gosia Kuczmowska. I am based in Warsaw, Poland, and I am the Logistics and Personnel Specialist of the Global Leaders Program. Before introducing today's guests, I would like to share a few words about our organization. The Global Leaders Program offers an Ivy League curated executive graduate certificate in social entrepreneurship and cultural agency each year to an international cohort of 50 musical changemakers, distinguished by proven accomplishments and persevering commitment to excel. Led in partnership with 9 top universities, among them Harvard, Duke, Georgetown, NYU, and McGill universities, the Global Leaders Program teaching faculty includes Nobel laureates, Grammy winners, and TED presenters who work with and support cohort members throughout a 9-month journey that combines online and in-person university-led courses and retreats, with on-the-ground fieldwork in more than 40 countries. Facing the pandemic, the Global Leaders Program initiated a series of events designed to support the continued growth of sidelined institutions and professionals from the music sector. These open enrollment webinars have involved the participation of thousands of practitioners from more than 30 countries around the world. We feel honored to have you all here, and we do hope this initiative will keep helping you get through these challenging times. The Spanish Association of Symphony Orchestras, AEOS, is a non-profit association founded in 1993, which brings together 33 symphony orchestras from Spain and Portugal. The Spanish Association of Symphony Orchestras has the aim of promoting and developing a range of initiatives to encourage cooperation and facilitate coordination across all member orchestras in all aspects of their activities, as well as providing a place where people can meet, exchange information, and train. It also speaks up for orchestras at national and international forums in representation of the interests of its members. Resetting the Stage is our joint initiative. As public officials, managers, presenters, board members, and other decision makers navigate complex questions of when and how to responsibly return to performance activities in venues, the Global Leaders Program and the Spanish Association of Symphony Orchestras, with support from Fundación BBVA, are co-presenting today's conversation as part of our Resetting the Stage series. From public health to economics, from event production to communication strategy, each conversation convenes a diverse group of industry experts to engage in examining next steps for the sector in a world transformed by social distancing. Now it is my great pleasure to introduce today's illustrious panelists. Jessica Lastig, 21st Century Media. Jessica has more than 25 years of experience in strategic planning and consulting services through her work with many of the world's leading concert artists, musical institutions, and composers. Her clients have included Google, YouTube, the Global Fund, the World Bank, and technology startups working in the cultural sector. Among her international marketing and consulting initiatives are conceiving and developing the YouTube Symphony Orchestra and assisting the US State Department in bringing the Afghanistan National Institute of Music to Carnegie Hall. Joe Johnson, Senior Marketing Manager at London Symphony Orchestra. London Symphony Orchestra Senior Marketing Manager for Digital Communications with overall responsibility for strategy and content production and dissemination on the orchestra's award-winning websites and microsites, e-marketing, social media, and mobile platforms. Joe produces LSO's live-streamed concerts, which are available across a number of platforms, such as YouTube, Medici TV, and Stringray Classica. Joe joined the LSO in 2005 and since then has seen the digital landscape expand beyond all recognition. Fabienne Morris, Intermusica, has over a decade's worth of experience in classical music marketing and communications, having worked for BBC Proms, Philharmonia, Royal Philharmonic, and London Symphony Orchestra, where she created the role of communications manager. Fabienne was selected to attend the League of American Orchestras Essential of Orchestral Management program for emerging leaders in New York in 2012. and holds qualifications in stakeholder engagement and fundraising. She joined the Intermusica board in December 2018. Fabienne is an alumna of University of Oxford, where she studied music. And Midgette, for 11 years, the chief of classical music critic of the Washington Post, a regular contributor of classical music and theater reviews to the New York Times for 7 years. She has also written for Vanity Fair, the Wall Street Journal, Opera News, the Los Angeles Times, Town and Country, and many other publications. The co-author of The King and I about Luciano Pavarotti and My 9 Lives, the memoir of the pianist Leon Fleischer. She is currently working on a historical novel about the women who bought pianos for Beethoven. Most recently, she wrote on the COVID-19 shutdown and its effect on the performing arts for Vanity Fair. Lawrence Pearlman, Semantix Creative Group. He is the founder and CEO of the group, a New York-based PR, communications, and strategic advisory firm which represents performing arts clients, including Anne-Sophie Mutter, Gianandrea Noceda, Carlos Miguel Prieto, Pittsburgh Symphony Orchestra, and Salzburg Festival. Lawrence is a graduate of Macalester College and received his MBA from Columbia Business School. Cristina Salvador, both. Cristina has more than 25 years of experience in the fields of corporate and crisis communication, arts audiences and management, communication skills training, public relations, and social responsibility, and holds degrees in journalism, international relations, and business administration, as well as digital business executive programs. Before founding the agency Both People and Communications in 2000, she worked in local media and was communications director of the José Carreras International Leukemia Foundation. Now, before welcoming today's moderator, I would like to share 3 brief housewarming requests. On the right-hand side of your screen, you will see a control panel which includes a questions section. Please go to this section now and write your name, country of residence, and your organization if you haven't already. We will receive and repost many of these into the chat box below to give you all the sense of great diversity of participants joining today from around the world. This questions box is also where you can post comments later in the session to add perspective to the conversation. Again, we will repost many of these into the chat box for the benefit of others. You are also encouraged to engage directly with our panelists by posting a question for one of them in the questions box. Please submit your questions as early as possible in the session, as there will be a limit to how many can be answered. Finally, at the end of today's session, you will be prompted to complete a brief survey that will appear on your screens. We kindly ask you that you share constructive feedback or suggestions for future sessions as we continue to evolve this growing series to address topics and challenges of relevance to all of you working in this sector around the world. And with that, let's get started. Resetting the Stage will be moderated by the Global Leaders Program alumna and manager with the Spanish Association of Symphony Orchestras, Natalie Osa Alzate. Natalie, welcome. If you would like to share a bit more about the partnership between our organizations, please do. I pass the word on to you.
Thank you, Gosia, and welcome all to the 4th session of the Resetting the Stage series. Today we will discuss about engaging the public to return communication. In the first 3 sessions, we talk about the general situation, the public health protocols, and the new formats of concerts. Let's say that today we have a better idea of how we will restart our activity. We have intensively working in the past weeks to develop all these new forms of protection and ways of making music to ensure a great and safe experience for our musicians and our audience. Today, we will stand out of the concert hall to ask ourselves, how can we attract the public to come back to the concert halls again? How can we defeat the fear? How can we communicate responsibly the real situation of orchestras and concert halls? At the end, how can we reach people and engage them with the strength and power of live music performance? So we're gonna do this through 6 points. We're gonna talk about sustaining public through the lockdown, artists, communicating with stakeholders, institutions, storytelling as an engagement, reconnecting with audiences, rebuilding community, and finally, overcoming the fear. So we're gonna start today's conversation with Jessica Lustig. Before we engage audiences to return, let's have a look in the past few weeks. Could you tell us, maybe share some examples about what kind of things have been working in terms of communication, what didn't work so well? How do we keep contact and visibility in our community even without performing concerts in these uncertain times?
Sure. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to speak with all of you and be on this illustrious panel. I'm Jessica Lustig from 21C Media Group. To answer your question, this time is filled with fear and uncertainty. Live events, when happening at all, are intermittent and filled with new rules and protocols, as we know. Performers, staff, and audiences are unsure what is safe and what is not, given the conflicting information from various studies and conflicting local rulings. Is singing worse than playing the trumpet or playing the flute? Right now in the US, string quartets can legally rehearse in one state, but not another. And the shifting situation will certainly continue here for at least 12 more months. It means everyone in our field must be very agile and flexible, ready to stop and start, and be fluent with new tools that help us with continuity of music for our audiences on and offline. Of course, we would like our audiences to return to live performance venues as soon as it's safe, but many of them are part of a vulnerable population, and our concert halls, many more than a century old, were not designed with social distancing in mind. In the US, there are a few tentative plans for small performances in outdoor venues this summer, while we await with dread the announcement of widespread cancellations for the fall season. However, in other parts of the world, some orchestras and concert halls are starting to open. The rest of the world watches you with both envy and trepidation. The best scenario for the return of the public to the concert hall is to have never left their imagination in the first place. For those of us facing an unknown timeline for returning to normalcy, we're focused on these opportunities to connect with the public in many different ways, always using storytelling and creating a narrative and a sense of event, though it's a very different story. For concert artists, to answer your question about what kinds of things are working, beginning in mid-March, there was a flurry of online activity. And for some, this has been a time of great creativity and learning about how to use digital tools effectively. A few events that have been successful, I would point to, and there are many, are Elisa Weilerstein's 36 Days of Bach, which gained a worldwide following, significant media attention, and including a New York Times feature. And in about 40 minutes, she will be featured on Carnegie Hall's live program, 2 p.m. local. So tune in when you're finished with this. Daniel Hope, Hope at Home. Immediately when the lockdown began, he had the idea to go to Arte, and they actually built a stage in his home where he did half-hour broadcasts every day to an international audience through YouTube. And now actually Arte has picked that up as a Friday, Saturday, and Sunday series. Many people are familiar with Igor Levitt's recitals from his Berlin home, 52 consecutive evenings with a worldwide following. And Yo-Yo Ma's hashtag Songs of Comfort, which was another sort of early entry into successful online events, has generated tens of thousands of responses. And he's had his regular videos as well as the Sunday live performance of the Bach Cello Suites, which aired live on 200 US radio stations and was live streamed on YouTube. In almost every case, the most impactful online experiences have been authentic and sincere. And the artists who have been most successful are those who have invested significant time and energy before the COVID crisis, learning how to get comfortable in the digital realm. So in many cases, they already had a significant online audience, and they all planned a regular series of events right from the start. Thankfully, this time of what we would call manic posting is starting to come to an end. Although there were some interesting experiments when we're talking about things that didn't work so well, many of the artists who live streamed from their phones, from their living rooms, studios, and kitchens, by and large, the digital audience is tired of these events. They're now demanding better production value and more thought through presentation. Many of these videos didn't work as well as hoped in terms of reaching a sizable audience, and some ended up doing more harm than good, now that every solo artist is looking for ways to monetize the same content that just weeks ago was made available for free. I also want to note that a few artists are thinking about offline opportunities. Gauthier Capuçon just announced that because his entire summer season is canceled, he'll spend the summer performing in small towns in France that request for performances from him. He's going to pack up his car with family in tow and go from town to town. So far, the response has been so overwhelming that he may have to ask a few friends to join. It's sort of like when Rachmaninoff or Paderewski traveled by train. Another way to have the audiences come back is to go to them. Just quickly touching on presenters and what's happening in the presenter community, the community connections with smaller groups have been very effective and continue to attract also news coverage. Staying local means meeting your public where they live and looking for ways to serve the community in more creative and spontaneous ways. Some simple examples, trumpets playing taps at military cemeteries on Memorial Day, which just passed here in the US. Of course, providing music for essential workers in various guises. One that just came to my attention was the Philadelphia Orchestra making an arrangement with the University of Pennsylvania hospitals and also many of them have created concerts and events online to raise awareness for COVID-related relief. And then performances by duos and small chamber groups in neighborhoods, often where the streets are closed. People sit in lawn chairs in their driveways, socially distanced in parks. The Dallas Symphony, for example, has had significant success with these and many performances, many of which have been somewhat spontaneous. It's been a little bit more difficult for the opera companies in America, but some have been very creative in thinking about how to use the resources they have at hand to be helpful. One is the Atlanta Opera, who early on made national news by putting their costume department to work sewing masks because we had a tremendous shortage here in America. They did that for local hospitals, and soon many opera companies started doing the same kinds of things with their costume shops, with the highly skilled costumers turning out many more masks per day than any of us could do. In general, the presenters who have a quality catalog of filmed assets have been at a great advantage during this time of communicating and keeping active with their audiences. They have the opportunity to do what some of the US universities will largely offer this year, a combination of live events and online events. Part of the agility required during this time is creating a schedule that allows for digital performances or small groups to perform live if the rules change and you can't have the big orchestra suddenly, and staying close to the needs of the community. The organization should never stop, but it needs to change gears frequently. The hope is with time, when the immediate threat of COVID-19 subsides, music and the need and the demand for public events will be stronger than ever. But in the meantime, finding creative ways to be of service keeps the music in the public eye during a time of changing rules. A couple of silver linings for communications. Now is a great time to think about how the organization integrates with your community in different ways, your audiences and your cultural colleagues. Developing that cultural ecology will help you all think together about how to contribute and bring the audience back together. Audiences have to be met where they are and will come back at their own pace. The speed and comfort level will vary. Remember that your organization is not your physical building. They won't immediately come back to you. There's a great need for educational offerings, from music lessons to material appropriate for local schools. So many are newly teaching online, and this is a great way to reach many audience members and their parents, new ones, new audiences. Another thing that's been very much on our minds is that audiences are getting more used to participating in various ways, and they're less passive than they used to be. There's a real need to connect and make contact among those with common interests. When using live video, showing the audience to one another and allowing for chat with designated responders helps a lot for people to see who else is out there loving the things that they love. It's also a great time for recordings and going deep into the catalog. For those who can, take a cue from the many existing digital distributors and content creators who are creating fresh wraps for pre-existing content with live or new interviews and live Q&A discussions where the audience can get involved in something that's already been out or already been creative. And I'd just like to close with saying that necessity is the mother of invention. Good times tend to promote complacency. Now is a time for frugal innovation, as I call it. Use the resources you have and plan to be agile and flexible to meet your community's needs. We all hope for better times, but let's use this opportunity to see how we can grow and develop in new ways.
Great, Jessica, thank you. And with that, we go to Joe. So could you please share about this from the institutional perspective, based on the communication strategy of a big institution like the LSO?
Yes, hello. Thanks for inviting me. Thank you for having me here. I'm coming at this from a slightly different perspective from everyone else because I have been on maternity leave for the last 9 months. I left the office in August last summer, and I'm returning in July to a very different world. My job looks completely different, or does it? Because this feels like this is my time. So I'm the digital manager for the LSO. This is my moment, and I'm not there doing it at the moment. I'm still sitting here at home as an ordinary punter, observing everything as the public would. So in order to do this, I've had to go to my colleagues still working in the office on a skeleton staff and ask them how it played out for them, because I've had various bits of information, but not all of it. So I went and asked them, and the obvious thing to find out was what happened. And here in the UK, the last concert that the LSO were able to do was mid-March, and it became clear around March the 16th, I think, that no concerts were going to be able to continue. And the first thing that they had to do was think, right, we have to communicate. This is, the government is saying, that's it, no more. What are we going to do? We have to tell them. There'll be all sorts of questions. So the first thing they did was to contact our stakeholders, as we have put it here. And the stakeholders in this case were very much ticket buyers, and in particular our donors, patrons with a big P, we call it there. So our very high level people who give us lots of money. The first thing that they wanted to do was inform them what was going to happen, and they contacted as many people as they could. There was a slight complication, I gather, in that 6 weeks previously, the box office at the Barbican Centre, where the LSO is resident, had just been changed. So this was an enormous project, huge, many years in the making project to get rid of the old box office system, bring in a brand new one, and everything that went with that. Suddenly 6 weeks later, its first test comes along, they have to cancel everyone's tickets. Could it stand up? And I gather the answer was not quite, that they had to do a little bit of messing around, sticking plasters, going back to the old system, pulling some data from here, pulling some data from here, and it didn't quite go as smoothly as they'd hoped. So eventually everyone was contacted about refunds or cancellations by the beginning of April. The LSO was slightly out of control of this because the box office system is owned by the Barbican Centre and not the LSO. And so they were kind of at the mercy of that. It wasn't as smooth as they had hoped. They contacted as many people as they could and said, this is what is going to happen. Concerts are not on. You will hear from us, open-ended. So there was a bit of a delay there, which was slightly unfortunate, unavoidable, of course. I gather in that communication that people were asked whether they would donate the price of their tickets rather than ask for a full refund. And I wanted to find out whether people had taken that up, what sort of percentage of people had, because I've heard anecdotally from around various bits of the arts world, not just music, theatre, pop concerts, that people had been generous and not asked for to receive refunds and donated the price of their ticket instead. Unfortunately, I could not get hold of those figures for the LSO concerts, but I gather that a few people had done it, and I can't quantify what a few is, I'm afraid. But however, what they were in control of was talking to our donors and patrons, the very high level people who have one-on-one discussions with the development team at the LSO, and a lot of them did donate the cost of their ticket, and significantly brought forward some of their donations that they would have been given. They brought them forward, or they increased the size of their donation to help the LSO in this time of crisis. I gather to the tune of somewhere in the region of £100,000 was raised in that way. So the strategy was to keep in touch with people as much as possible, and currently at the moment everyone on the list receives communications fortnightly from the marketing team, and this is mostly around our program of digital concerts that we've been able to put on. It was said in the introduction that I produced them, so we've been producing live concerts for a number of years, live streamed on YouTube. And we had all of those nice packaged concerts sitting in our archive, and we've been able to bring those out again and replay them, which has been fantastic. They were able to do it really quickly. I was quite impressed myself, even knowing what the size of the archive was. I was sitting here in my house thinking, wow, they did that quickly. Completely redid the website. They called it Always Playing, which was a play on our season tagline, which was Always Moving. They renamed it. They were able to bring out these concerts. So they're communicating still constantly with everyone, letting them know what's coming up. There are 2 concerts a week, one on a Thursday, one on a Sunday. Those are the days that normally the LSO would be playing at the Barbican Centre. They have been in regular contacts through the development team, have been in regular contact, weekly contact with the patrons and the friends. They have been doing things like small Zoom sessions with small groups of donors with LSO musicians involved. That sort of maintains the kind of contact that these people value with the orchestra that they get in real life when this happens again. That they were able to talk with them and feel like they're involved with the orchestra, not just the music concert making itself. And I gather that they're planning to have online recitals, single player recitals, a program they call the Chair Endow, where a donor endows the chair of a principal player, and those will do a recital for the people that have donated money to that particular program. So what's been important, I think, is the speed of response here, that they were able to get on and talk to people very quickly, very naturally, and it felt to me like a natural step on from everything that we've been doing in the last 8-9 years. The readiness was impressive. It's taken a lot of investment to get to this point, and it wasn't an easy thing to do by any means, having been involved with it. Very tricky negotiations with staff and musicians, with the rights. All of this has been bubbling away in the background for so many years, and it just happens to have been ready at this right moment. It's what I've seen has done is that it's impressed all of our supporters in particular, some of which have pledged more money to help do more of this work, because it's not cheap. It's also, I think, done wonders for the internal staff structures in helping people to communicate cross teams. It's needed a very big effort cross team to pull all this together and to make it work, but it's been extremely valuable. And hopefully what it's done is to show the value of digital streaming to the people who have been a bit skeptical up until now. Just quickly, in the last minute and a half that I have, some numbers to put on that. Over 100,000 people have watched 25 concerts between the 22nd of March and the last one will be on the 14th of June. They sort of average 6,000 or so views. They've gone up to 16,000 for the most popular one. And in that period, we've gained 12,000 more subscribers to our channel on YouTube. There's been 1.5 million views of our videos in that time. Ad revenue, more than $2,000. And it's been interesting just looking at the demographics of people. The biggest percentages are 65 plus, of which we know those are going to be the people who are going to have trouble returning, perhaps when they want to, because they're the highest risk category, and also the 25 to 34-year-olds who are the digital natives at this point, are really keen to watch this stuff, are consuming it and enjoying it. I think it'll be a tricky one to convince audiences to return. I know people are going to talk about that in later, and I'm wondering whether there's a bit more of a local view coming rather than a global one. Particularly London is a tricky one where we have a lot of tourist market here, and we don't have very much of a supporting the home team type of feel that I know lots of other cities have. That's pretty much my take on it, and whether we can convince people that the digital experiences are worth following up when we get round to getting back to live performances. That's what my hope is.
Thank you, Jo. So now we go to Anne. Anne, as a journalist, what stories do you think people will be more interested in reading about orchestra's return? What is the best way for orchestras to present this story to members of the press to get the most helpful coverage from them?
Well, I join everybody in saying thank you for having me here. I think one silver lining of this crisis so far is that it's stimulated a lot of different kinds of discussion that we haven't had the opportunity to have before. It could also be that I quit my job as a regular newspaper writer in November, and so I'm privy to these discussions now all of a sudden, having changed my role as a member of the press, where I'm no longer representing an institution. But I've seen a lot of very adventurous thinking. I think the dirty secret of the COVID shutdown for the orchestra world is that it is accelerating the pace of a lot of sweeping changes that have been necessary for a long time. Now we have a scapegoat to blame it on, and maybe it will be less painful because we can say, oh my God, the shutdown did this to us. But we all know we've been dealing for ages with how do we get the audience in? How do we get the word out to people? I'm not just answering these questions because it's COVID-19. I think everybody's been talking about it for a long time. And the chance to address them for all of us and having a little more leisure in terms of not having to put on concerts 5 times a week to address them is a really great thing for the field. The field needs this kind of reassessment in many, many ways. The question of how to get the word out to journalists is one that I think a lot of orchestras need to ask themselves. As some people have said to me, what does local journalism mean anymore? In America, we don't have very many local music critics anymore. There's only about 12 of them left, I think. I mean, local, national music critics. Local papers don't tend to have critics. So the whole mechanism, as your marketing departments all know very well, is a different one in terms of just letting people know what's happening out there. But the question of what makes a story and what is a newspaper going to want to run is one that I think not enough orchestras ask themselves. So when you're saying, how do we spread the word in the wake of COVID-19 that we're back? What is the story? I hear a lot of, it's for the love of music, and live music keeps us together, and live music is passionately important. And that's all true. I mean, we wouldn't be in this room, in this field, if we didn't believe in live music. It's not a newspaper story. It's not necessarily a story that my former editor, who didn't really care for classical music, would give the time of day. You have to have some actual story that people want to hear. And you also have to bear in mind that all of the critics out there have basically written their first, second, and third story about digital innovation and the amazing broadcasts that orchestras are going to be doing. So you have to think of, really, it comes down to your mission and why are you putting on these concerts? And a lot of people don't know. I mean, I've had press people for years approach me and say, we're putting on these 5 concerts. Why don't you do a story about our season? And I'll say, what is the story about your season? And they'll say, we're playing Beethoven, and then we're playing a woman, and then we're playing Schubert. And that's still not a story. Even if you're playing a woman, that's not a story. And I can't write the story unless you know what the story is. And especially, I've encountered a lot of press people who who get very annoyed when I don't write the story they suggested to me. But there's very little awareness of what people are going to want to put into the paper. An interesting story is, how do you put together one of these digital things? How much of it is recorded? I mean, it's all recorded in advance. How do you splice it? Who's working behind the scenes to make it all look like one piece? An interesting story is almost always about the people making the music. This is not rocket science, because the most interesting thing on stage is also the people making the music. As Jessica said, authenticity is key. And individuality is key. This is what people are coming to art for. And we get very used in the orchestra field, as a parenthesis, to presenting ourselves as a faceless mass of people making a beautiful sound. And as we all know who work in communications, audiences are always hungry for that peek behind the curtain. And I think orchestras right now, with all of the changes that the COVID-19 shutdown is bringing, are primed finally to let people in a little more behind the curtain. You're going to have fewer audience members in that house when they do come back. You're going to have a more intimate relationship with what's happening on stage. This is a huge opportunity for building connection. I know in the opera world, people often don't find that connection because they're so far away from the stage. You see these little bitty figures on stage. It doesn't really have a resonance. But when you're sitting in the first few rows, as many of these modified COVID-19 seating charts have, and you're actually feeling the vibration of the music and seeing the musicians, that enables you to develop an entirely new relationship with the stage. And this is something that orchestras should be capitalizing on. I would add that in the rush to find new audiences and build new audiences, people often think about a lowest common denominator. There's a lot of dumbing down. And I always quote one pitch I got that said, "Hey, Anne, why don't you write about the mezzo-soprano Susan Graham? She likes to hang out in cigar bars after the show, and that's an interesting angle for your readers." Never mind that this expensive press guy didn't know that I had literally just profiled this singer like 2 months before in the New York Times. He hadn't even bothered to search her clips, which is, again, always Google. But the fact is, that's kind of an interesting story, a one-off. Like maybe some editor would say, "Hey, that's a funny story. She likes to smoke cigars." But what are you actually trying to get the audience to do? How are you trying to engage with the audience? Is it about just getting them in the house once, or is it about creating a basis for an ongoing relationship? Because orchestras need that ongoing relationship with the audience, and yet very few marketing campaigns are built on establishing that. It's all about, "Hey, we're doing this great thing one night." And I remember hearing from the New York Philharmonic a couple of years ago that on any given night at the New York Philharmonic, almost 50% of the audience were first-time attendees, which is an amazing feat on the part of their marketing department. That's getting a lot of new people in there, but it's also a terrible figure because it means they're not coming back. It means the marketing department is doing headstands to get new people in, and that's great. And they go once and they check that box and they go away again. So when you're thinking about what your stories are as an institution, you need to be thinking about why people want to see you lots of times. You know, it's not like you just do it once and have the experience. And I think we tend to forget about that. You need to remember that it is not the newspaper's responsibility, or the website or the blogger. It's nobody's responsibility to write about you. There's a lot of stuff to write out there. And I think this new emphasis on digital is reminding everybody that once, as Jessica said, the excitement dies down and everybody's gotten used to these new formats, we are now competing with everything else that's on YouTube. And it's a really tough world out there to make your way in. And plenty of classical musicians have done it before the COVID shutdown. Valentina Lisitska, for example, the pianist, had a huge YouTube following. She knew what you have to do to build a YouTube following. That's one way to do it. It's a lot of work and it's a very specific focus. But the real bottom line, as I intimated before, is that you have to do really exciting, good work that's worth writing about, because an exciting performance is a story. A review in the newspaper is a story of what happened. But if the performance is exciting, then there's a million things that I want to write about it immediately. And two of the best orchestral related videos I've seen in the last 10 weeks. One is the St. John Passion from Leipzig. It was a live broadcast on Good Friday. They did it socially distanced. They had 4 soloists in the hall and then one main soloist, a tenor I had never heard of named, I wrote it down, Benedict Christiansen. And a vibraphone, and a keyboard player. And then they had the orchestral parts done with the mosaic choruses zooming in from remote locations, who were supposed to have come live to do it. And it was stunning. It was an amazingly beautiful performance. It was not a, oh, it's a placeholder, you know, we can't be there, so we'll watch this. It was an amazing, vital piece of art. I immediately, and my husband too, we went and Googled, who is this tenor? Who is this guy? It turns out he's been doing this for a while. He just got the spotlight in the shutdown. That's a story right there. The other one I would mention to finish with is the Bamberg Symphony. I don't know if any of you have seen the Bamberg Symphony COVID-19 piece. I think it was 2 or 3 weeks ago they put it up. And they have a member of their orchestra in the string section who is a composer. And he wrote a new piece for them. And they put it together with an actual film editor. I don't know the story because I only actually saw it a couple days ago, and I'm obsessed with it now. But it is a music video. It's not pandering. It's not dumbing down. It's vital. It's actual orchestral music. It's a piece about COVID-19. So there's a lot of video footage relating to the crisis. So the little figures of the musicians playing are interspersed with sites of empty cities or medical workers. It's done very tastefully, and you were left feeling like you saw something that is about our time, about our situation, and it's vital, and you're happy you saw it. That is a story, and that's what you want to get your audience back. You can do the same thing on stage. There's a lot of exciting things you can do on stage to make people want to come, but we don't want to be running after the audience, begging them to show new interest in the same stories. The whole point of this whole experience, it won't be worth anything if we can't come out of it having new ways to present ourselves that make them want to come back. And you're figuring out how to get that word out is only a part of what should be a larger reimagining of what that word is in the first place.
Thank you, Anne. Thanks. We're going to Fabienne. Fabienne, we're talking a lot about the audience and we want them to return, but what's the audience? What that really means?
Yeah, thank you. Firstly, thanks for having me, and hello everybody watching. I should just warn you, if you see my husband wandering around in the background, that's because my very naughty cat decided to just jump on the mantelpiece and destroy something. So apologies if that's in the background. Now that's that disclaimer out of the way. Yeah, today I'm going to speak in broad terms about what I see as some overarching comms issues, including this really important issue of understanding our audiences. So I do currently work for an artist management agency, Intermusica, and I used to do marketing for orchestras, including with the lovely Jo at the LSO. But I won't primarily be referencing those contexts, partly because we've already heard from Jo from the orchestra's perspective, and from Jessica and shortly Larry about the artist side of things. That said, if you do have any specific questions about how everything I'm talking about relates to artist management, please do feel free to put that in the chat box and maybe we can get to that at the end. So, as humans, we are designed to spot patterns, to create stories. It's what we do, and it's how we make sense of the world. And never have we wanted to make more sense of the world than right now, in this time of global uncertainty and crisis, and for many people, personal tragedy. So this need to find a concrete way forward, though admirable and logical, it can give rise to some assumptions. And in the next 8 to 10 minutes, I'm just going to walk you through a couple of assumptions that I've seen crop up in the classical sector during this crisis. And actually some of it follows on from what Anne was saying. Because it's my belief that we as communications professionals, we need to be sure on the messaging that we want to get out there. And that starts with interrogating some of these pervading narratives. So I've got 3 assumptions I'd like to walk you through, and I'll start by listing them out before coming back to discuss each one in more detail. So assumption number 1, this phrase post-pandemic. I find it quite problematic. The idea that there is going to be a single endpoint to such a complex socioeconomic phenomenon, a before and after type narrative. Assumption number 2, and this is where the audiences come in, speaking about our audiences as if they are one homogeneous group. When will our audience return and how will we get them to return? That's a lot of people to lump together and assume that they're all going to act in a similar way. And assumption number 3, the idea of universal future trends in the classical sector. That is, that we're going to come up with a neat list of solutions for how the classical world is going to get through this crisis and propel itself forward into a more modern, relevant incarnation of itself. So as you can tell from my tone, I'm a little skeptical of these narratives, not because I think they're untrue, but because I think they're incomplete. And while simplifying complex problems and extrapolating is to some extent necessary, I do believe that we as communications and marketing professionals have a responsibility to dig into these stories and think critically about how they apply to our companies, our audiences, and our regions. So let's return to that first assumption, the idea of a post-pandemic point. So I would like to offer an alternative narrative of a risk spectrum. So in amongst this coronavirus crisis, we seem to have forgotten a fundamental truth, that we as human beings are never truly safe, and we are never fully in control of our health, or indeed the course of our lives. To be alive is in itself a risk, right? So, and the fact is that it may take a very long time to find a vaccine. We may never find a vaccine. The UK government actually said this in their 50-page COVID recovery plan that they published a few weeks ago. And if we do find a vaccine, it may not be fully effective for everybody, just in the same way that the flu vaccine isn't. And if you add to this the fact that some people may not be comfortable with having a new and relatively experimental vaccine. So what all this means is that we can't rely on there being a single moment when it's going to be totally safe for our audiences to come back to concert halls. And instead, I really think we should be prioritizing a narrative of an acceptable level of risk. We can't promise our audiences that they will be 100% safe in coming to our performances. We've never been able to do this. Instead, we can communicate clearly the steps that we've taken and continue to take to mitigate and minimize risk. And perhaps even more importantly, demonstrate that we really understand our audience's concerns and we have robust mechanisms in place to listen to those concerns and respond compassionately and efficiently to them. So let's now turn to this idea of treating the audience as a single entity. So my alternative narrative goes like this. Get to know your audience as fully as possible, ideally through a mixture of segmentation and direct contact. So I imagine a lot of you listening tonight or today are marketing and comms professionals. So you don't need me to tell you that you have a lot of different subgroups within your ticket buyer base. Not to mention your other key stakeholders like donors, your volunteers, your education and community participants. When we talk about encouraging audiences to return, we do need to get a bit more sophisticated. And one way to do this is to use audience segmentation frameworks. And I'd like to present you with one I've seen very recently, which I think has a lot of validity. So there's a cultural consultancy in the UK called Morris, Hargreaves and McIntyre, nothing to do with me, the Morris. And about 10 years ago, they published a really important piece of work called Culture Segments. Joe will know this because the LSO uses culture segments. So it's a psychographic segmentation tool, and it helps cultural organisations understand and engage with their attenders and also with non-attenders, people they would like to start coming. And it goes beyond what people are doing, how many tickets they're buying, what seats they're choosing, and looks at why they're doing that. And so the net results, when you apply this tool, is you segment your audiences into 8 core groups. And each one is defined by deep-seated values and beliefs that frame the way that those people engage with culture. So what Morris, Hargreaves, McIntyre have now done, which is really interesting, is in response to the COVID crisis, they've actually done a whole load of new research. They've surveyed, I think, about 5,000 audience members so far, and they're doing more. And they've come up with this framework that they've called the COVID audience mindset. And it maps directly onto the 8 existing culture segments. So you can then use this insight to literally forecast which of your audience members are most likely to return first, as opposed to who is going to hang back, and crucially, why they are making those decisions. From there, you could, of course, go on to tailor your copy, all of your marketing approaches and your comms to stakeholders. So I haven't got time to go into the tool in more detail, I'm afraid, but if you're interested in that, do have a look at the Morris, Hargreaves, McIntyre website, or just look for Andrew McIntyre on LinkedIn, He's actually offering free webinars on this topic at the moment. And they've also launched a communal Slack channel. It's called Audience Matters, and anyone can join that. And they're having some great discussions about this issue of audience segmentation. So lastly, before I wrap up, I'm going to go to this third assumption, this idea of universal future trends that are going to save the classical sector. And my alternative narrative, I'm afraid, is much less sexy. It's this, there are no silver bullets. You're going to have to work hard to find out what works for your audiences, your institutions in your part of the world, and then test, evaluate, and refine, and repeat that cycle. I told you it was not as sexy. So in recent weeks, we've seen a massive rise in this forecasting, with commentators and industry experts coming out to tell us what they think the big seismic changes in the classical industry will be. Now, one thing we do all seem to agree on, as Anne said, is that coronavirus has actually revealed and exploited pre-existing weaknesses within the sector, not least our continued reliance on large-scale orchestral and operatic formats. And there is also agreement that, as disastrous as the virus is, and it truly is heartbreaking for our sector, it is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to question some old business models and entrenched practices. So some of these predictions that I've read, things like reduction in international touring, increased focus on using local artists, smaller scale, shorter performances for smaller audiences, broadcasting to outdoor audiences, making better use of or tapping into the many amateurs who are now at home playing instruments, and so on and so on. So there are some fantastic creative ideas there, and I'm not suggesting that we don't continue to throw those out for discussion. However, and this is the key point, woe betide you if you just pick one from that list that you like the sound of, or because it worked for a colleague in another country. What works for the Berlin Phil is not likely to work for the LSO. Why? Well, because despite them both being world-class symphony orchestras, they're really different. They have different budgets, different audiences, and they operate in different parts of the world. Classical music is revered in Germany. It's part of the very fabric of their cultural identity, which is much less the case in the UK. So really, as per the audience segmentation point, it comes down to being really knowledgeable about your audience and the context in which your organisation sits. And only once you're sure of that, do you want to be looking at which of these trends to pursue. So I think that's about all I've got time for. And I hope these three examples have shown that it's really important to question the language we use and the narratives that we take for granted before we launch into any activity. And I'd be really glad to take any questions later. Thank you very much for listening.
Great, Fabienne. So talking about the context of your organization, we go into Larry. Larry, in the past 2 months, we have been broadcasting and streaming globally, but in terms of rebuilding and actually saving our institutions, should we look at the global market? Just, you need to turn on your microphone.
Yeah, I'm here. All right. First of all, I wanted to thank everyone for the opportunity to be here, and especially alongside such an illustrious group. It's been really wonderful hearing all the thoughts here, and there are some things left to say, you know, as you just pointed out. And specifically, I have to say that Anne Midgette, it's always a joy to listen to your outlining of the PR approach to the world, because I learn something every single time, and it's always hopeful. So I hope people were really taking notes, because it's always great to hear your points of view and everyone here. So what I'd like to talk about is the local aspect of all of this. The fact is that we, as an industry, have looked at ourselves as global. Every institution believes that they are a global platform. You know, the internet gives everyone a global platform. And during this crisis, leveraging the global platform has been an incredible opportunity for everyone. I think we've gone through the stages, some stages of grief, and we've been able to deal with that grief by presenting on a global platform and pitching stories and being able to do some good with it. One example I'd like to use that we worked on was Jan Vogler, the great German cellist, spearheaded an initiative called Music Never Sleeps NYC. He's based in New York. He also lives in Dresden. And for Jan, really early on, we're talking about March 16th, 17th, he picked up the phone, he called his friends in New York, and he said, we need to do something, we need to play together, we need to present something to the world. And he organized a 24-hour marathon, which was covered internationally. It was a great example. It was early on. And he then replicated this a couple weeks ago, and this gets into the local aspect, going from global to local. He runs the Dresden Music Festival, and he had to cancel the festival like everyone else had to cancel everything. And Jan realized, you know what, this can have a global platform for the Dresden Music Festival, but if anything, he needs to give back to his local constituents there, the government, the local sponsors, the local audience. So although it did have a global platform and it played, you know, was viewed in hundreds of cities around the world, ultimately that visibility for Dresden and the ability of artists to communicate with the Dresden audience filled a gap for it. So I prepared a few little remarks about this. And I think that what we need to realize, and the key realization I think we're all going through as a result of the pandemic, is that we've gone from globalization to localization. As much as the internet and social media have given every institution a global communications platform, the fact remains that the survival of our performing arts institutions will be driven by local communities. Streaming will not save institutions in the long run. It's a stopgap measure, really. Ultimately, orchestras and opera houses in our industry must get the green light to resume live performances from local governments. This isn't even a national issue, really. New York City is different from Dallas. Washington, D.C. is different from any other city, from Miami. As we've seen in America, the federal government is leaving decisions to states, and states in turn are leaving a lot of decisions to mayors. Institutions can plan all they want, but if local governments don't give them the green light to proceed, then all planning is irrelevant, actually. This begs the question of communicating the importance of the arts industry to local governments and the willingness to take risks. If the mayor of Washington, D.C. says the gatherings of more than 250 can only take place after COVID-19 is cured or there's a vaccine, then what exactly can a performing arts institution like the Kennedy Center do at all? All the streaming in the world will not make up for the losses at the box office. This brings us back to communications in its most basic form. Digital platforms give us the ability to connect as never before. However, this pandemic is the moment to connect with as many local constituencies as possible, while leaving the global impact of a digital stream as the whipped cream and cherry on top. Each institution is playing to its local audience and reminding them of their relevance and their need to survive. American institutions depend on philanthropists more than peer institutions around the world. Therefore, when the Philadelphia Orchestra announced that they will be performing an at-home gala on June 6th, I believe it was much more of a signal to the local community, even though people around the world can watch it. The element of global PR communications is still important, but ultimately every institution is now competing for everyone's eyeballs, and the focus in the coming months must be on your local community. One recommendation I would make is to find a comparable city doing something that you believe your city should be doing, and then lobbying for your local government to let you do it, as long as it's safe to do so. And I think that's the key thing here. You know, having this discussion about how we're going to come back is very important. What are cities around the world doing? But everyone today is now reduced to their local environment. I used to travel 100,000 miles a year. You know, now I'm lucky if I travel a mile or a mile and a half. And you know, every business has been affected, every institution has been affected. And when I talk to some clients, it's very interesting. They say, it's great to plan about the next 3, 6, 9 months, but my calendar is actually booked to 2025. You know, what's happening in 2024, 2023, no one knows. So every institution is going to be different. Every ensemble, every artist is going to be different. And of course, the ones that are the well-heeled or have had careers for the last 30, 40 years, they're going to survive. The people who are just starting, the orchestras that were just barely making their budgets work, they're the ones, and many, many, many cities are facing this. That we're looking at a situation where the communications element is wonderful, the streaming element is wonderful, but if they don't have revenues, these institutions will go. So what we need to do as a communications industry is help educate and remind everyone that local communications with government officials and reminding them of what our industry needs, of what the artistic institutions and performing arts institutions need to survive is critically important. but that's different in every single country. So I agree with my colleagues here that it's not a cookie cutter. It's going to be far from a cookie cutter. And one thing that has also come out of this, and I think that this is kind of my finishing touch on remarks right now, would be the artist entrepreneur and executive entrepreneur are going to be the ones that lead the way. The entrepreneurial spirit right now of creativity, of ingenuity, that is what's going to get us to the next step. So I think that a cookie cutter approach is not going to work. Baking everyone's own cookie is going to be the much more likely approach, and the local is what I want to stress here. That it's great to look and to pitch a writer like Midgette a story is wonderful, but why, don't spend your time necessarily pitching Midgette right now. Take your time and really spend and invest it in your local community and talking to the politicians, talking to the cultural leaders, talking to your audience. And that stuff is great and may notice you at some point, and that'll be wonderful, and that'll be, some whipped cream and a cherry on top of your great achievement, but it's not actually going to help your institution really survive.
Thank you, Larry. Now we go to Cristina Salvador. So with all this being said, what type of messages should we create to overcome the fear?
Well, thanks for having me here, and regards from Barcelona. It's a pleasure to be with you all. As Lawrence said, I also learned a lot today, so it was really interesting what we heard until now. I hope I can add some more things to that. And about messages to defeat fear. Well, the opposite of fear is trust. And as many of you said, also Fabienne, we cannot guarantee a full security, right? So we cannot send messages of like wishful thinking. We need to be kind of true to what's happening and treat our audiences as the adult people they are. So it's very important that we kind of just bearing in mind that the most important thing we have to do is to gain trust and regain trust. So this COVID crisis has meant a breakdown of our routine, of our normal life. So we went from a normal life to this very pandemic shutdown kind of life, and we got used to stay at home because that meant protecting our life and the lives of others, especially the eldest, which is very often our hugest audience. So after just staying home for over 2 months and getting used to that, because people say that you just need 21 days to gain a habit, and now we are having the habit of just connecting to music, connecting to poetry, connecting to culture from our homes. So we need to regain this old habit, because now it seems very old, of socializing with people when we're used to social distancing now to protect our lives. So what do we need to do to kind of help people want to come back when we cannot guarantee full security, when we need to kind of regain this new habit, right? So we work a lot in, as a communications professional, we'll work a lot in change. And for change, we kind of have 4 pillars we work with always. And these 4 pillars help us create that story that Anne was telling you about, which I loved your approach to storytelling. And these 4 pillars we work with are understand first, the second is desire, the third one is belong, and the 4th is leadership. So when we come to understand, we kind of have to understand fear and have to embrace fear. We do not have to judge fear or minimize fear of feelings of people. It's normal that the kind of fear to do something else as what they have been done until now. So we need to show them that we care for their safety, that they will be okay with us, that we've done everything possible to ensure that our place is nearly as safe as their home, because that's what they need to hear. I mean, they are now afraid to come back to the office. They all want to continue doing home office, right? They are even afraid to be in places with 10, 15 people. Just imagine in a concert hall. So it's normal that they have fear. So we need to send them messages that we are getting ready to have them back. So we are organizing and reorganizing the seats creatively to allow social distancing. that we are just rechecking all corridors, that we're deep cleaning, that we're doing all necessary things so that they feel sure that they can come back. So the second thing was the desire, just to kind of help people want to change their, now normal life, which is staying at home, right? We need to help them overcome their fear. And to overcome their fear, we have trust and also the desire to do something. So we need to show them that we are getting ready. So we need to show them that our musicians are rehearsing, that life is little by little going back to normal, and that we're waiting for them. So what about the new programs we're going to have? What about, and even very important, we can co-create them with them. So kind of if we have the audience participate, right, they will have even more interest in coming back. And this is linked to the third thing of belonging. And you all talked about communities. It's very important to be near to our community, to our heavy users. And this is very much connected to local. In Barcelona, most arts and music audiences are local. We have a lot of tourists coming to Barcelona every year, millions of tourists, but they go to Sagrada Familia and Camp Nou maybe to see the football, but not really to our concert hall. So most of our audience is local. And we are used to have this, very kind of 0-kilometer connection to the people that are coming to our events. So we need to make them feel that we are close to them. We need to enhance conversations now more than ever. Now that we have this social distancing and that we have this, cotton, and we are so used to webinars and to talk to the people on Zoom or Meets or whatever, we need to show them we are close to them. We need to enhance conversations. We need to really care about customer attention and audience attention. We need to make them participate. It's an always-on communication we need to do now. It's like being there. You need to be there. You need to be top of mind, and you need to show them that you continuing doing something for them. So it's really important to pay attention to your community and also to enhance, as Anne said very well, your cause, your purpose. So it's not only going back to a concert, but it's really advocating for a cause. And if people, share your mission, they will kind of be more ready to come back. And the fourth and last thing I told you about is leadership. So we need now a different leadership in our, venues, orchestras, events. We need more creativity more than ever. We need more flexibility. We need to surprise our audience. We need to do things differently. So I also don't have a silver bullet here, right? But we need to, the new normal will not be normal. So what is our new way to do things, right? I'm always talking about anti-normal instead of new normal, because anti-normal means that we're gonna get stronger and better through adapting to a no normal life, right? So this is what we need to do also in the arts field. And for just to give you an example, it's a small example, but these small things makes differences. We have a festival here in Barcelona, which is called Cruïlla. Sonar and Primavera Sound are maybe better known. This Cruïlla means crossroads in Catalan. And they called off, as everyone else, their summer festival. But recently, they just told us, we're going to do a different festival. We're going to do over 200 events in the open air, right, for less than 200 people. So 200 for less than 200 throughout July, right? And they call this extra small festival, right? So new ways of approaching to our audiences, new ways to getting close to them, new ways to doing things is also a very, very important way to approach what we need to do in the coming months. I mean, Lawrence was saying maybe or Fabienne also, maybe we don't find the vaccine. I'm really optimistic about no pandemic has, lasted forever. So that someday maybe we can go back, right? But in the meantime, we need to be really creative and be really caring for our audiences. So we need to help through our messages to make them feel safe, want to come back, feel that they are part of it, right? And feel proud of what we're doing. So these 4 pillars for me are very important in kind of doing our messages from now on. Thank you.
Thanks, Cristina. So before we go to the questions from the audience, I would like to try to resume a little bit of the interesting things that we heard in this hour. So we talk about flexibility. We talked about don't lose our imagination, that if the audience don't come back, we can go back to the audience, about that our organization, it's not one building. We talked that we need to keep in touch with people as much as possible. We need to keep the contact with people. And that was very, very important, the speed of response, like the organizations that were already ready to this, just starting in this new work very fast. Maybe this crisis is accelerating changes that were necessary for a long time in our sector. We talk also about that we need to have a story more than just putting these concerts, because we need to build connections, and maybe sometimes exciting performance, it's a good story to tell. We also talk about these assumptions with Fabienne, and we maybe have to try to think in that we need to accept some level of risk. We need to understand what really concerns our audiences, and for that it's very important to get to know them, maybe through segmentations, or maybe to have direct contact with them. We also talk about that maybe this is a time to go from the globalization to localization, and we should focus in our local community. And at the end, we talk about the trust is the opposite of fear. So with that, I would like to go to the questions from the public. So this first question is to Joe Johnson. This question is from David Rojas from Amproband, Spanish Association of Professional Wind Orchestra Musicians. Do you think that open-air concerts might be the first step to engage the public to return to full orchestra concerts?
I can see why that might be considered an option, because we know now a bit more about the transfer of the virus. The open air often not so much risk now as being in a confined space. For the UK, that's probably not an option, because by the time we get back to performances, it's going to be getting into September, October. The UK weather is not going to support this kind of activity. Only like one day in the summer this is possible. I don't know. I don't think so. I think people, as Cristina was saying, if we get our messaging right, will trust us that we have done the work that we need to do to make the concert going experience as safe as we can, and the experiences on stage as safe for the musicians as we can. And if we get that right, then I think that indoor concerts are perfectly legitimate.
Thanks. We are going now. This question is for Jessica Lustig. This question is from Carolina Marquez from Medea Arts Management. So she asked, is there a danger that audiences get too comfortable with this new form of listening to music that will keep the concert halls empty? I
would say categorically no. I don't think that anybody can think that the digital experience of watching a concert is any kind of substitute for being in a concert hall. I mean, I think I'm going to say what a lot of people might be thinking but don't want to say out loud, which is that digital tools are great, but in many ways, social media has also let us down during this time. It's a tool. It will help us, webcasting. It's what we have. I'm not trying to denigrate it. I mean, that's pretty much what we can do. But I think Anne was actually talking about something that's on my mind too, and that is if you really want to use these digital tools well and effectively, you have to kind of create new art for them. You can't just take what was written in the 1800s and put a couple cameras in front of it and mic it well and have it be an exciting, interesting experience that is replicated somehow what it would be like to go to an exciting, interesting concert, with friends and colleagues and feel what it's like inside the concert hall. So, I mean, that's my personal take. I don't think the audience that's going to come back is going to be the same audience. So I will just say that. But I also think that the offerings need to change, which a couple of people have already mentioned. I don't think it's going to be a one-for-one substitution, though. Anne, you're muted.
And you need to turn on your microphone. And just 1 second.
Yeah, there we go. Somebody turned it on.
There you go. Yeah.
Thank you. I was just going to say that I think the development of digital should be regarded as a separate but equal pursuit, because what I'm hearing from some people who are doing digital things is that they're finding they're building a new audience which doesn't overlap with their old audience, which is interesting too. And, you know, people who talk about new forms of performance, people hear that and get very emotional about how much they love the status quo. And I don't think anybody is suggesting throwing out the baby with the bathwater. We all love, again, the tradition. That's why we're all sitting here. But there can be a lot of different ways to offer it. And you could have some more traditional concerts and some more vital new kinds of concerts and excite it for everybody. You know, the people who really want to go sit in a red velvet seat and hear Beethoven, we hope that will be available to them. We hope we can get some new people in there as well. I think that diversifying and mixing it up is only going to enrich the concert experience for everybody, and that people will want to come back to the real hall. But that if there are people who don't, give them something as well. Of course, it means that the orchestra has to work 6 times as hard, as Fabienne said. You can't just sort of do this on the side. And that's one of the problems to innovation that we've had for years in the orchestra sector, is that everybody has to work so hard just to do what we already do, that there isn't a lot of bandwidth to think about all these new things. And that's not ever going to get any easier. But what
also
Cristina
in America, we have problems with agility because of union issues. We don't have the possibility of just getting the players to do a lot of these new ideas. There are a lot of barriers there. But yeah, I mean, I want to be clear and say I'm not against digital media at all. That's our lifeline. It's just it's not a substitute for the live event in the hall. That's all.
Yes, exactly. And it's also not something that orchestras should glom onto and say, oh, now we've got this, and that's going to be it. I mean, I think people are going to grab it as a silver bullet, and that's not at all the answer, because live performance remains at the heart of what we all do and what's the most exciting thing about it.
Thank you. I have one question from Lawrence. This is from Ignacio Barón Viela, Executive Director for the Billing Symphony Orchestra in the United States. Could you share what are your views on how the classical concert format should be moving forward, or until we return to normal?
Well, I think that the big question, and that's a great question in terms of format, I think that format is going to depend on what we can do in the concert hall. So, I mean, people are talking about maybe doing 2 concerts in one evening with a reduced audience, and there's so many different variations and scenarios for this. But the programming question, I think, is in some ways going to be the question that can only be answered when we know that we can come back into the concert hall. I think that's the big question, and for a community like Billings, they may actually be at the forefront right now. I think that if you look at states where you have fewer cases, you have fewer spread, you have easier way to contact trace, you have easier way of testing, or smaller populations, that's going to be a very interesting test community, and there's an opportunity to lead the way there. And I think what's been successful with your audience in the past, if you've had great success with format, I think that your format doesn't necessarily need to change. You don't want to push away your core audience that's willing to come back. They want to come back when it's safe. So I think when safety is established, and you can communicate that it's safe, and you're in a community that's less touched than, let's say, New York City or Chicago or other major centers, you have an opportunity to lead. And then that's going to make a great story, by the way. I think that the first institutions back in a safe way, presenting something, are going to be the ones that lead the way. So I have to, in a way, unfortunately, throw it back to Billings and say, you know what works really well with your audience. And if you're ready to come back, and you're going to be able to come back, then you're going to be ready. I mean, maybe someone else can give a better answer than that, but I think that this, go ahead, Anne. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I was just going to say, breaking in as always, that that I think that the format should have been being played with for a long time. I think one of the problems that classical music is regimented into this format, that we believe a concert has to be this, and that's one of the problems we already have attracting new audiences, is that not everybody wants to have that format. And it again won't hurt the field at all to try an hour concert, an intermissionless concert, a concert at a different time. That doesn't threaten the art form. I think people so often conflate the art with the experience and the institutions that have grown up around it, and forget that the art is, you know, Beethoven's going to be just fine whether he appears on a program with somebody else or not. He's going to be fine whether he appears in a concert hall or not. We can have the courage to try different formats and different things, and should have it more anyway.
Fabienne, do you think that we should create different messages for the different segments of audiences that you mentioned before?
Yeah, I think obviously it is dependent on people having the data, right? So it's in the best case scenario, you've actually done that segmentation work, and you can easily sort of extract, you know, the groups. But I think there are more kind of informal ways that you can probably segment your audience as well. But yeah, I think, you know, you've got to think there's going to be a wide range of people. I mean, for example, in the Morris Hargreaves McIntyre model, you have these 8 segments. One is called Essence, and Essence are basically your hardcore, hardliner arts obsessives. In a sense, they don't need marketing to. They just need to be told, we're open and this is what we're playing. And these people, in the report I read, it said, like, oxygen has been cut off for them. That's how it feels for them. And these people, regardless of their age, probably will just run back to your hall within reason. They need to know that there's some safety, but these people will come straight back. So actually they don't need much persuasion. Whereas looking at another segment like the affirmation segment, which is characterized by, these are the people that say, I feel like I should do culture. They're just kind of quite diligent people. They tend to be much more risk averse. And so they've actually, in this report, been enjoying the kind of possibility of exploring in lockdown from the safety of their homes, and actually they're going to need a lot more encouragement. So they're going to be the people who they're going to need to know these are all the measures we've taken, whereas for some other audience members that may actually even put them off to kind of have too much information. So I think wherever possible, if you can be doing some kind of tailoring, and obviously, you know, through your e-news, through your adverts, through your social media posts, it is more easy than ever now to target and tailor. And your copy maybe only needs a few tweaks to kind of emphasize certain different things. So I think if you can, and if you can't sort of go all the way with segmentation, maybe you can do some focus groups and you can get a sense that way. But I think that is going to be crucial, because too much information can also put people off. Let's not forget.
Yes, Cristina.
I wanted to add something regarding that, because the usual segmentation we used to use until now, maybe today is a bit different, because we don't only have the segmentation of the behavior of people, but also of their emotions related to COVID. So some people that may feel Essence may today be more fearful, and some others may be early adopters to come back. So I wouldn't force the situation, but just try to find out who are the early adopters, who are the people that want to just come back, even if they are a few people. Have them in our place, safe and taken care of, and let them speak about the experience, because people now need ambassadors of this new normality. This has also happened in companies. So in the arts field, we can kind of look at what happened in companies. So in companies, we're having the welcome back, what they say, the welcome back to new normal now. So a lot of companies are having their staff back to work, and they don't want to go back because they felt perfectly safe at home, and now going back, you know, to the office and commuting and all this is a mess for them emotionally. But then you have other workers that have been essence workers in the sense of health sector, of a lot of very important sectors that have been working this whole time, also in the industry. So what we have done, for example, in some projects, is let them speak about what they have done until now. Let the people in the industry, in the health field, explain their experience of being there, right? So that the others understand, right? If they did during the, the peak time of the pandemic, we can do now, right? So it's very important to kind of offer people reference, ambassadors of, this new normal. So I would kind of use it from that and let people talk, on your behalf, not yourself only.
Thank you, Cristina. And with that reflection, I let you with my colleague Gosha, that she's going to give us some information about the upcoming sessions. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Fabienne, Lawrence, Cristina, and Natalie, as well as everyone who has joined the conversation today from around the world. We are so grateful for the chance to connect such a truly global group of practitioners, and we look very much forward to any feedback or ideas that can help make this initiative grow its value to you and your professional lives in the future. And on that note, thank you for taking the time to share your feedback with us. Before closing, on behalf of the Global Leaders Program and the Spanish League of Orchestras, I have a pleasure to announce that Classical Next will be joining as a partner of a series of upcoming sessions that will take place for the next 2 Thursdays. During those sessions, together with illustrious industry leaders, we will explore 2 deeply important and rapidly evolving themes. On Thursday, June 4th, restoring trust, contracts, and cancellation. This conversation looks towards a new future for contracts and agreements, towards restoring trust in a sector that has seen in recent months the unprecedented widespread use of force majeure. The industry experts will be Jasper Parrott from Harrison Parrott Agency, Marta Gilmer from San Diego Symphony, David Wilton from Philharmonia Orchestra, with more panelists soon to be announced. On Thursday, June 11, Midsummer Nights, the Paths for Festivals. This conversation explores questions surrounding the unique challenges and opportunities faced by decision makers involved in managing 2020 summer festivals around the world. Industry experts who will join us are Alan Fletcher from Aspen Music Festival, Michael Herfliger from Lucerne Music Festival, Marcelo Lopez from Campos de Jordao Festival, Antonio Moral from Granada Music and Dance Festival, and more distinguished panelists that we will announce soon. Thank you again. Have a good afternoon, good evening, or a good rest of the day. Stay safe and healthy, and we do hope to see you very soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.